Alright, hey guys, my name is Jonathan and I'm here to talk to you a bit about Blender. I've heard a lot of people say that Blender is really hard to learn, and while it's not quite as easy to operate as an actual Blender, it's also not this confusing spaceship that's impossible to control. If you're new to Blender or 3D modeling in general, you might wonder what steps to actually go into creating a scene from start to finish. So before we talk about how we do things, let's first look at a simple version of what we're doing when working in Blender. To demonstrate this, I created a little low-poly muscle car. So let's check out how I would go about making this one. First you bring in some objects to use as your base. In this case it's a plane for the ground and a cube as the base for a car. While in object mode, you move your objects around and scale or rotate them so they've got roughly the shape of what you would like to create. Then you select the object you want to work on and you switch over to edit mode where you can start modeling on your object. You add new edges, you move things around, you extrude or insert faces to create details, and you assign materials or textures and you start to give shape to your model. You can use reference images to create your model, or you can just have a go at it and see what you end up with. While generally speaking, looking at references is very important and helpful, it's sometimes also good to just experiment with your models, have fun and try out things you saw in tutorials, play around, especially as a beginner. Trying too hard to get close to really complicated reference, for example, can be frustrating and take the fun out of learning, which isn't going to help you get better at all. So if you find what you're working on isn't fun anymore, don't hesitate to just start something new. You set up the camera to make your scene look nice with a cool perspective, and you can change the aspect ratio to create landscape, portrait or square images. You can switch between different perspective modes, change the focal length of the camera to give your scene a different feel, or set up a depth of field effect. When you want to bring in some lighting, you switch back to object mode and add some lamps. You move them around, set their color and strength, and customize the lighting until you like it. This is not a one and done kind of thing, but instead you'll probably work on your lighting all throughout your modeling process and move things around or redo the lighting completely as you get a better feel for what you want to achieve in your scene. In the end or in between, you can render your scene, which means that your computer will calculate the lighting and generate an image for you, which you can then save to your hard drive to edit in other programs like Photoshop, or you can improve your image using post-processing like color correction, bloom effects and more in Blender directly. Depending on the complexity of your scene, the materials and lighting used, and of course the resolution you want to render at and your computer hardware, this can take a few minutes or it can take much longer. It's of course possible to end up with really complex scenes that take many hours or even days to render, depending on how high resolution and how clear you want your image to look. But there are also a lot of tweaks that you can do to keep your render times down. Let's now talk about how we can actually get started. Alright, so when you first open up Blender, this is what you'll see. This is called the 3D view, and this is what you'll be looking at most of the time. Here in the middle we've also got our default cube and some other objects like the camera right here and the lamp. You will also notice how there are a ton of buttons and options on the sides here that can look really overwhelming in the beginning. So for now I would suggest let's get rid of these panels here and give us a bit more room to work. To do that you can hit N to hide the right panel, and you can hit T on your keyboard to hide the left panel. If you want them back you can just press T or N again and just hide and show them with these keys. Alright, so let's talk about moving, rotating and scaling your object. When you select an object by right-clicking on it, you get this gizmo here with 3 color-coded arrows that are basically representing the different axes in your 3D space. So the red one is the x-axis, the green one is the y-axis, and the blue one is the z-axis. So what you can do is you can click on these arrows to move your object. But as you know, cool kids press buttons, so what we can also do is we can hit G to grab. This brings us to the next issue, of course, that if we want to move it only on one axis, what can we do? Well, there's this simple trick where you just hit, for example, Y on your keyboard to restrict it to the y-axis. So when you now drag your mouse, you only drag it along the y-axis. Same for the x-axis or the z-axis if you want to move something up and down. The cool thing is this also works for other stuff, for example scaling. If you scale something by hitting S after you've selected your object, you can scale it uniformly, or you can hit, for example, Z to only scale it on the Z axis, or you can hit X or Y to do the same thing with the other axis. This also works for rotating stuff. So if you have something selected and you hit R on your keyboard, you can rotate the object. But if you then hit Z, you can rotate it around the Z axis or the X axis or the Y axis, depending on what you need. Hitting right click will abort this, or hitting left click will accept this. This is the same for scaling, moving and rotating as well. So for example, if you scale something down and you're happy with it, you just hit left click. If you scale something and you wanted to go back to where it was, or you changed your mind, you just hit right click. The same of course for rotating and for moving. Alright, I would say that wraps up part 1 of the tutorial, and I hope to see you in part 2. If you have any questions or feedback, just leave it down in the comments. I read them all and I reply to every comment. See you guys next time!